Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to BRIC's Pre-Apprenticeship Speaker Series, where we aim to give you an inside look at the various careers across entertainment, media, and tech with help from the industry pros themselves. I'm Sarah. I'm BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator for this series. And our session today is all about user experience, user interface design, or UX UI design, for those who know. And we're joined by Matt Carlson here, who is
Hey
the
everyone.
Director of User Experience Design at Adobe. You'll hear more from Matt about his career background, the exciting things he does at Adobe, and give you an introduction to what exactly UX design is. But before we get started, I do want to remind everyone we like to host a live Q&A at the last 15 minutes of our session. So make sure to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you have any questions you want to submit for Matt along the way. So with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to give an overview of sort of my career background, and then we'll walk through some of the things that I'm working on at Adobe and some of the UX and UI design that I've worked on in the past. So please do ask any questions to Sarah. I told her to interrupt me. I'm not going to be able to see all the chat while I'm presenting, but I will totally chime in and answer any questions that you might have. But I'm going to jump in with a little bit of background. So here's my own backstory. My name is Matt Carlson. As I said, I'm the design director for the design director of, or the director of user experience for education, Fresco, which is our drawing app, and fonts here at Adobe. Here's a late night self-portrait that I drew of myself. This is an easier to draw cartoon version that you're going to see through this presentation a little bit. My motto, also drawn on the wall behind me, is suspend disbelief, which I use all the time when I'm talking to clients or I'm talking to product managers or people who say, oh, I don't think we can do that or that can't be done. Like my job is always to go like, I think we can do it. I think it's possible. So suspend disbelief. And here's my mission statement. I'm specifically going to really focus on education and on kids. And my personal mission statement is help kids build skills that they'll need for whatever they want to do in their life, whether that's a creative pursuit or anything. I'm a teacher's kid. I was born into like Montessori at a very young age, and so that definitely affected the way that I think about design and UX. And I was born also in Seattle, like pre-tech Seattle. So this is pre-Microsoft, pre-Amazon, pre-Starbucks, even Seattle. Like the exports were like lumber and salmon and seasonal depression. And that was kind of like where I grew up. I escaped to California in 1988. I went to UC Berkeley, where I was a whole bunch of different majors. First, I was a broke art major who couldn't afford the paint. And then I was a broke English major, but I could afford getting books at a library, so that was pretty good. And I didn't realize what I wanted to do until after college, and I worked at an ad agency as an assistant account executive. And then I saw a person there who had a huge computer, and they were designing cool posters and designing all these graphics. And then that's where the first time I realized what design is. And I realized, aha, design is like art that you get paid for. And so I went back to design school in San Francisco, and for a couple of years to kind of like learn some of the core basics there. And after I graduated from design school, or actually like while I was even still in it, my very first design job was designing all of the stuff that falls out of your Sunday paper. So all those coupons for ice cream or rice-a-roni or paper towels, it was like designing all of that. And the one takeaway that I have for all of you is that your first design job may not be your last design job. Sometimes your first design job is not too great, but it's a step along the way. So my first design job was designing this. My second design job, I'm going to walk you through my whole career path in just a moment. Oh, one last little takeaway from that one, and this totally dates me, but this was like I started design at the time when the internet was beginning to blow up, and I went to the boss there and I said, we should really make a website on the internet to show off the portfolio for all our designs. And my boss at the time, I've hidden his identity here, was like, the internet, that will blow over. And this was 1994. Turns out it didn't blow over. Pretty interesting. So here's my whole career path from where I started at that small ad agency. And then I worked at a place designing the coupons that fall out of your Sunday paper. My next stop was at a place called Clement Mock Designs that designed some of the first websites that existed. It was one of the first studios that really focused on websites. And that's when I got into UX and user experience. Back at the time, we called it information architecture and visual design, but now like the modern title of all this is UX UI. So I worked at that place designing some of the first websites. I worked at a tiny print design studio. Then I worked at a company called Phoenix Pop that did nothing but, and I was a design director there. They did nothing but websites for startups. Surprise, surprise, they're not still around. The next thing, I had my own studio. It was called Department 3. We never grew beyond 3 people. And we did a mix of websites, interactive experiences, and some print. Then I went and worked at a place called One and Co., which was an industrial design company. All the people who were founders of One and Co., most of them went off to go work on physical products at Google. And then I worked at another industrial design shop called Design Continuum back in Boston that did a mix of all sorts of products. And there I developed interactive experiences and also the brands that would go along with physical products. My next step was a place called Hot Studio that did some of the first iPad apps out there. And we were so good at designing interactive experiences that we got gobbled up by a company called Facebook, now called Meta. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Owner of Instagram, owner of WhatsApp, and all that stuff. I was at Facebook for a couple of years. And then I worked at Twitter before Twitter was called, what's its current title? X. Anyhow, before Twitter turned into X, pre-Elon Musk, before it like melted into the lava. I was there for 3.5 years working on a bunch of different products there. And then finally, the last stop in my 13 job journey is at Adobe, where I've been for 8+ years now, working on a bunch of different creative products. And it's definitely my dream job. So I've landed at the happy place, but it's been a long and really interesting journey along the way. And one thing that's kept me going that I just want to share, it's a recurring theme, and we'll circle back to it at the tail end of this, is for me, the key to success has been knowing what I'm really good at. What are the things that I can get paid for? What are the things that pay the rent? Like those core skills that make me pretty marketable in my job, and then what I'm passionate about. And these are taken from a book called The Element by Sir Ken Robinson about education and around like what's really meaningful to people. But so I'm going to talk about both those things, what I'm good at and what I'm passionate about. Here's first, I'm going to start with what I'm passionate about. Like, these are the things that I really love doing. It's drawing stuff. Drawing stuff ever since I was a kid, ever since I was an art major at Berkeley, drawing has been sort of a constant theme throughout my entire design career. It hasn't been like the major, it's been more the minor, but it's been a constant presence. So I love drawing things. I love drawing type, of course. So it makes pretty good sense that the fonts team is one of my teams here at Adobe. And I love drawing fantasy stuff. And these are some fantasy drawings from a game that I designed. I'll share a little bit more about that later. And if you see me doodling in meetings, I'm most likely doodling robots. I love drawing robots and kind of thinking about the future. And I draw games for kids. This is from a Kickstarter game, role-playing game that I made that was kind of like D&D, but fun. And lastly, what I'm working on these days is children's books. This is from a children's book that got launched last July called Talking Rocks and Minerals. It talks about all the backstory of rocks. And it's also something that I drew the entire book from like design to the final illustrations in Adobe Fresco, which is luckily one of the apps that I get to work on here at Adobe. And lots of logos along the way. So that's what I'm passionate about. But here's what I'm pretty good at. Design is like one of the core things that has been that I've found over the course of my career, that like it's just the thing that sustains me, the thing that is the through line that goes through all the jobs and all the different places that I've been. And some aspects of design that's really central to what I do. One thing is design thinking. So I would describe design thinking as basically like creative problem solving. That's the easiest way to think about it. Coming up with like a big challenge and a big problem and working with a bunch of people to map out what that challenge is and how you can solve it. And this is actually a really core part of user experience as well. So I use this design thinking skill and like shaping and collaborating on ideas together with other people as sort of a core part of brainstorming new products, of thinking about the ideal design experiences. This is all from some brainstorms that like happened back when I was in my Twitter experience, where I'm bringing together a bunch of designers to come up with ideas and to start like suggesting how we might create. Sometimes it's called a minimal viable product, but how might we like take all these ideas for creating a product and begin building them into the application itself. Here we were talking about video products within Twitter. That design thinking also sometimes takes the form of science fairs where we'll whiteboard out challenges and work together to collectively or collaboratively problem solve. And you'll see some little glimpses of UX in the background here. One core aspect of UX is mapping out ideas, mapping out user flows, mapping out your ideas, into kind of wireframes that then can be used as the foundation of design. So it might take form of drawing out experience models for the ways that people might interact with a website or an app or a digital experience. And what does it look like at each stage along the way as they move through an experience? Sometimes that design thinking and the UX thinking focuses on personas and who are the customers that we're solving. And we kind of sketch out and we map out who the users are of our product. What do they need? What do they want? What do they dream of? How can we design ideal experiences for them? And sometimes my job involves doing like kind of lo-fi concept drawings where we bring everyone in. They don't need to be able to draw. They just need to be able to draw a stick figure and draw some boxes within boxes. And they can start sketching out what a user experience might look like. And here's where like we begin to one thing that's a core aspect of user experience is this sense of mapping, of coming up with the way that people and systems begin working together and how do you map all of that stuff out so that, and I'll talk about like what product teams look like in a moment, but so that you and your whole team can understand what you're designing, can understand what you're building, and all the different forms that it's going to take. This is a form of like co-creation where a lot of this stuff is like a central aspect of user experience design and design thinking is coming together to map out options or collaborate on like what form a website or an app or a product could take and finding out ways that you can everyone can contribute ideas into it. So I'm going to walk through some of the different things that I've designed through my career. And here's another way of kind of like that I think of when I talk about design. Design is creative problem solving with meaningful outputs. Meaning you come together, you've got that problem, you have that challenge, you have that thing that you want to make or that need that you need to fill. And design is just a way of creatively solving that problem. But there's always something at the end that is either a product, a service, an app, or some type of actual output. And what I mean by that is this, meaningful outputs, it's got to be something that helps people meet their wants, meet their needs, accomplish their goals, fulfill their dreams. And here's what like designers are good at. User experience designers are really good at telling stories, at designing experiences, at mapping out customer journeys, at scripting interactions, and imagining what's possible. Here's a little bit of an example. I worked at a product design company where they were great at designing perfect machines. So like how could you create a machine that makes the perfect cup of coffee? And and that company did it and they made this thing that could make the best cup of coffee you could possibly imagine. And it was sort of the size of a truck and it had a lot of complicated parts and you needed like a nuclear physicist degree to figure out how to operate it. Like what a user experience designer will do in that situation, take all that complex, that really robust, awesome product and figure out how to bring it down to human scale. And think about the user experience of people using it to make it really positive and simple and clear. Here's what, when user experience, the way I work with teams and what teams look like in most of the companies that I've worked at, whether it's any of the interactive companies or Twitter or Facebook or Adobe, there's eng and there's product and design. And what engineers do is they are able to really understand the core functionality of products and map out what's possible. What can we do with the technology? What can we do with the core infrastructure of the products that we have? And then you have a designer, and a designer is going to come in and think about like, okay, that's great. Now we know what's possible. What's going to be meaningful? What will resonate with the customers that we have? So we're really thinking about the user experience. And then there are product managers, and product managers go, okay, that's great. We know what's possible. We know it's meaningful, but like, how are we going to ship this? And a product manager will come up with the way that you can break a project down into like different phases and different stages, figure out how we're going to design it and build it, and how we'll bring that idea of what's possible and what's meaningful to our customers into something that we can actually ship. And they form kind of this complex module. So I've seen this play out within all the tech companies that I've been at, where you have engineering and design and product management at the core. And then you often have research, where we have researchers who go out and really understand what our customers need. And they'll often take living product, live product, and out and evaluate how a product works and bring back insights which then change how we design things. There's also content strategists and writers. These are people who are, if you look at anything on your phone, or anything on your computer, you'll notice that there is messaging and words and content everywhere. So content strategists and content designers come into the process and they help kind of define the messaging and the language and the instructions that fill every digital app and every experience that we have. Then circling this, there's program managers who often like make sure that all the schedules are working and that, what we're building, it works with everything else that the company is building. And then we have product marketing managers that help shape the brand and the way that we think about every product we create and help to market it out to the people who will be using it. So that's the mix that I've seen within all the tech companies that I've worked at. So there's lots of different roles beyond just the designer. That's just something for if people are wondering about, like, there's many different paths in design and there's many related fields. And I'm going to walk through really quickly some of the things that I've actually designed in the past. So one of the very first things I designed at the company that designed websites was a match website for a chess match between Kasparov, who was like a grand chess wizard, and Deep Blue, which was a IBM computer, one of the first AI computers that had really gotten powerful enough to compete and in this case actually beat the human player. So that was like one of the very first websites I worked on. I worked on in the basement of this building where the match was going up above, and we were moving tiny pixel pieces around play by play so that the world could follow the match. Another user experience that I worked on was rethinking and redesigning a magazine. In this case, it was the Harvard Business Review, where we were looking at how can we make a magazine filled with business insights much more consumable, much more readable than its sort of current iteration. So user experience, it's often has to do with digital experiences, but can also do with print experiences or products. So you hear user experience used pretty broadly. Another thing that I worked on is one of the first magazine apps that made it to the iPad when the iPad launched. So here we were trying to envision the future of digital publishing and think about how magazines could be read and consumed on an iPad. And we're really trying like what types of interactive functionality would bring a magazine to life and make it as powerful or more powerful than the physical printed magazine. And that was one of the first projects I worked on. This is something that we did in 6 weeks before the launch of the iPad. And when we first started working on it, they wouldn't even give us an iPad. They would just give us a kind of square of foam core and say, it's about this size, and just figure it out. So we had to kind of guess and estimate how people might interact with magazines in new ways. And some of the first magazines I worked on, I know you look at me and you think I'm more of a Vogue reader than a 17 or a Mary Claire reader. But this was actually one of the magazines that I worked on first. And this was an opportunity for us to consider what are those interactive components that would make a digital magazine more exciting than or as exciting as a print magazine. And we did things where you could like shop the photo shoot, or where we could have digital video makeup tutorials where it could kind of come to life as readers were looking through it. Both of these were for Hearst. I also worked on early things where we're looking at how we create new forms of digital storytelling, where we could take where a kid, this was a product called Intel Story Play, aimed more at 4 to 8 year olds, where we could take that and let kids build out a story, drop stickers on it, storyboard out their concepts, make it their own sort of digital book. The initial brief from Intel was like, oh, can you make this like PowerPoint, but for kids? It's like, I don't know many kids who want to use PowerPoint, but our take on this was to really create something that was more interactive and fun. I've also done drier things, like this is working on the ad model for Facebook. So this is working on the complex system that allows Facebook to build customized ads for all of their customers. And to all of you, I say right now, I'm sorry. But this is another thing that I worked on as a user experience designer, thinking about how ads could be customized for different audiences. So sometimes UX means mapping out really complex systems. And then also developing what's a visual language that will help to tell that story. So here I worked with an illustrator to commission some unique illustrations that became icons and part of the whole user experience. Jumping over to Twitter, one of the things we did at Twitter was look at ways that you could shop from your DMs. So if you found saw a really cool post about sneakers from Nike, you could go in there and buy the shoes right away and use DMs to kind of dive into a commerce flow. Those are some of the things I did before Adobe. And I'm going to walk really quickly through some of the things I'm doing now, which thankfully I'm out of the world of advertising into things that are a little bit more creative. But first, I'm going to talk about Adobe Education and some of the stuff I do here. So the big idea here is we want to be the place where kids ideate and create. And the audience here is really global students, optimizing for kind of 12-year-old and up. And one of the core parts of our experience is a product called Adobe Express. So within Express, like it's basically a really easy to use creation tool that's focused on design, focused on creating images, focused on creating videos and stories. You can do tons of really cool things easily, design pretty much anything you'd imagine. You can design it in Adobe Express. And specifically, my work here within the education team is taking this product and figuring out how can I make it meaningful for students? How can I make it easy for whether you are in junior high or high school for a student to dive in and create stuff and get started? And so a lot of that is like making all the options you can do super clear and coming up with like a much more rich visual way to explore, express, and figure out like, okay, maybe I want to create a poster or a video. Maybe I want to brainstorm ideas. Part of the user experience here was identifying the top use cases that students and teachers really wanted to do and making it very easy for them to get started. And that might be doing things like, maybe I'm going to create a collage or a visual poem and make it super easy for a user to go in and, we create these templates and frameworks that then students can come in and make their own, add their own copy, add their own images, add whatever they'd like to customize this and make it their own. But it's a little bit easier often for people to get started, and even for me, it's easier to get started with something where I'm not facing a blank page. I've got some content in there to play around and shift around and then add my own stuff. That's a lot of what we do within Express. We have like really meaningful templates that are geared towards students so they can make it easy to get started. And we also have stuff that becomes the perfect project for teachers to pick up and do something that lets their students learn how to use these digital tools and personalize them to reflect themselves. So like part of our audience is students and part of our audience is teachers who need to help their kids learn how to use all these digital applications. Because I love drawing, of course, there's also, making some really easy tools to draw or color within the Express experience. And this is a little bit more for the younger side, but that was like something that lets everyone go in and be able to create some interesting images on a Chromebook. And one of the most fun things that we have is to be able to go in and you can add your own voice and animate characters and bring these sort of fictional and sometimes fantastical spokespeople to life with your own voice. I'm going to talk about a couple more apps really quick. So first is Project Wonder. So the big idea with Project Wonder was to, once again, it's really focused on kids' creativity. We want to help kids to cultivate, or parents to give their kids like the perfect creative app, get kids drawing, get kids creating right away. And the big idea here was to let kids have this place to play with digital creativity, to draw their own creations, but then potentially bring them to life, like figure out ways to animate one of their drawings or to add stickers to one of their drawings or to use AI to make a drawing or color in something and then enhance it or transform it. Here's the vision of that. That was like a concept pitch. So sometimes within Adobe, they even have startups and incubators where we try and come up with ideas for new products and then bring them to life. And actually, this product, it was called Project Wonder. Now it's called Project Aqua. You can find it in the App Store. And here's what it transformed into. It transformed into this kind of explorative experience. Here is where we decided that the user experience for an app for kids 4 to 8 or 4 to 12 should really feel more fun and game-like than just a plain creative app or like the traditional Adobe app. So this one really features more the core UI here. The user interface here is more like a map where you can go in and discover all these different activities and dive into them and then play with them. So it's more like endless exploration instead of just accomplishing some single creative focus. And within each one of these islands, there were things like coloring pages that kids could use and dive into, and had a really simplified drawing UI that's easy for any kid to get in and get started with without needing any instruction. Kids know that, like, okay, I see all these art instruments on the bottom, I see colors on the right. I know exactly what to do here. A kid will immediately start coloring. We also created these backgrounds and sticker pages so kids could make their own sort of puppet shows and begin to play around and animate those. And here's an example of what I meant. Like we wanted to like figure out ways to both kind of encourage personal creativity, but show how kids might be able to enhance that or transform that. The biggest focus within Wonder was to look at something that that a kid might create and then figure out ways to kind of fine tune that or tweak it so they could have an even richer experience. So this was the drawing, and this could be transformed into something that was like that. And both things are really special. I think the core drawing is really great, but we wanted to figure out ways that we could kind of bring it to life or show it in a different perspective as sort of a fun twist. The last app that I'm working on right now, and these are all the things that I'm working on at the moment, is Fresco. And Fresco is Adobe's free drawing app. And my main goal here is to, like, how can we create an experience that will keep kids drawing past 8-year-olds? Past, like, 8-year-old, when they're a lot of kids kind of drop off around 9, they maybe stop drawing, maybe stop feeling less creative. My whole goal here and my mission is to keep everyone, whatever age you are, drawing, having fun, having drawing be part of your toolkit. So the goal here was to make an app that would do just that. It's a Fresco. Once again, it's a drawing app that is powerful enough. If you're a professional illustrator, you can use it to make great illustrations. I do that. I use it for my children's books. But if you want to just get started doodling or having fun right away, it's also fantastic for that. And I use it to draw all sorts of things, but, like, here's a tiny sneak peek at a future project I'm working on right now. I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but it's a sequel to my first children's book. But my team, so I'll talk about the user experience of Fresco. With something like this, we're talking about what are the tools that an artist would need, what are the user flows they'll go through from when they're initially coming up with the sketch to all the way through to when they're creating final art. And part of the user experience here is figuring out all the tools, all the palettes, all the parts of the experience that that artist will need and optimizing it around them. And then providing the ways that they can discover what do other artists create in this and how do I learn? That's another kind of central part of this. So that's Adobe Fresco. That's like the third big thing that I'm working on right now. So education, fonts, and Adobe Fresco with some internal startups mixed in. And the last thing I wanted to share is just a couple deep thoughts, and then I think we can get into a conversation. But, like, what I've thought about and what just thinking about today, some key things that are essential to my practice and what I think of in user experience are I've been thinking about, like, what are the resilient skills that have sort of mapped through my entire career. And the most important thing to user experience is storytelling. And storytelling, it's like understanding who is the hero of your story. The hero of the story is the user who you're designing for, and crafting these meaningful experiences that will resonate for them. And then you shape all these stories, and you usually end up telling them over and over again to your clients, to your collaborators, to the other people on your product team. Storytelling is probably the most important skill that I've developed. And it's a mix of my art major, English major background, but storytelling is used as this central component of really everything I do and everything I've done. So telling rich stories around how people experience products or services and accomplish their goal, fulfill that need, do what they are set out to do. And then you as a business, you're kind of crafting these really rich stories around how you're going to make it really easy for people to do that. Another resilient skill is, like, my unique perspective or your unique perspective, the perspective that you've developed, learning everything you've learned, experiencing everything you have. I think if you are a little bit older like me, I've had a rich array of career experiences and watched a massive kind of shift in technology and different types of technology being adopted. If you are young, you are experiencing technology in whole new ways that different from myself, different from my generation. That's part of your unique perspective. Where you grew up, Sarah's in Montreal, I've been from Seattle and San Francisco and Boston. That forms your perspective, your school, your culture, everything that you go through is part of your unique perspective that shapes the way that you think about products and is a unique part of your development as a designer. Aesthetics and curation. This is another central thing, is like continuing to, like, grow and develop. I read a ton of books. I go to a ton of museums. I watch movies that inspire me and feel magical to me. And I'm always trying to like kind of learn and develop my own sense of what's good, what is beautiful, what's powerful, what's meaningful. And I use that as a really central aspect to kind of guide me through design. I've also been, if you can be a designer or an artist or an engineer or a product person who does collaborates effectively with your team, who creates great frameworks for creative collaboration, that's been another central aspect. I've gotten really good throughout my whole UX career at running brainstorms, creating collaborative experiences that designers and artists and product managers and writers can work together to build things. Your human empathy and experience is really central to design through user experience design. It's another core resilient skill is putting yourself in the place, in the shoes of the people who you're designing for. And lastly, the last resilient skill that I'm always learning. So right now, I'm continuing to learn new software tools, some AI, some not, about how to build things, about how to craft new experiences. The other thing that I think is like the core resilient skill is that, like always be learning new things. And I have one other sort of, when I think about the future of design, the future of UX design, this is this core metaphor that really sticks with me. I think I grew up in an age when being a designer, you could really be a specialist and you could be focused on crafting an artifact or creating a simple object. Like I'm the guy who creates pixel icons, or I'm the guy who creates logos, or I am the best person in the office at designing posters. Like designers could really be a specialist and focus on being good at one thing. But I think the future of design and the future of creativity is shifting from being that craftsperson focused on crafting that artifact. And yes, you have to get good at being able to craft artifacts, but it's just as important that you begin thinking more like a composer, where you start thinking about what is the bigger story I'm trying to tell. And as designers begin kind of evolving towards the future, I think that's going to be the challenge. That you have to start thinking more like a composer or a film director or someone who is telling a big story that's composed of many different things and that you're working on with many different people and or systems. Because you might be sometimes using AI to fill in gaps, or you might be using a big team to fill in the gaps. Not everyone can be good at every different aspect of it. Why I love the composer as a metaphor or the film director as a metaphor is you need to leverage lots of different skills and bring in lots of different people to help tell that big story that you come up with. And I'll circle back to this. The other thing that's really sustained me throughout my user experience career is having a set of things that I'm really good at that I can get paid for, and having a set of things that I'm really passionate about that keep me alive and also inform what I'm good at. So my love of storytelling, my love of illustration, my love of taking images really feeds into my design skills and my design experience. And those are things that like together, they really blend and sort of circle and reinforce each other. And so that's all I've got from a presentation today. Those are the stories that I wanted to share. But we can go way deeper into the user experience or answer any questions that you all might have. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all your faces and see the chat. But I hope that was a good overview.
That was such a great overview, Matt. Thank you so much. Let's see. We do have a question that just came in from Maria, who asks, from a design ethics perspective, do you think we as designers carry responsibility for how much time children spend on iPads when we build kids' apps? Should UI and UX be intentionally designed to help limit screen time rather than maximize engagement? That's a deep
Absolutely.
thinking question.
Absolutely. And, I also, full disclosure, got two kids. We definitely had iPads growing up, and then iPhones after that. And I heavily recommend, I think digital experiences are fun. And I try and make the digital experiences that we create as meaningful as possible so that it's providing, like, I don't want it to be like soft drinks. It's not empty calories. I think the whole thing that I strive for is to create meaningful experiences that actually help build their digital foundation, that help build their creativity and leave them with a meaningful story. But screen limits all the way. all the way up into college for my kids. So like definitely like get them drawing on paper. I think it's really important at wherever you're at that telling stories, reading, writing stories, doing all the authentically human stuff is really crucial. Even as we move into a world where I think it's, unavoidable that AI is going to play a role in many creative endeavors in the future. But I think that foundation of being able to frame a picture, make a movie, draw, write stories, these are core human skills that enhance all of our abilities. That's like the creative foundation that we all need to build.
I love that. And I especially love because Matt, you mentioned that storytelling is such an important, resilient skill to have in a
Yeah.
field like this. Do you have any other advice for how folks can build upon those storytelling skills, in particular, things that have worked for you in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the inside tip. So, full disclosure, I am like a high functioning introvert. And the way that I accomplish that I get past that and I become comfortable talking with people like you in meetings like this, is I write. So, a core aspect of storytelling is writing. Writing in your notebooks, writing down your ideas whenever you have them, especially after you've gone on a walk or taken a shower or done whatever it is, like where like that brilliant idea pops into your head, write it down. And if it needs a picture drawn, draw that picture. But I think the thing that helped me break through being a low functioning introvert to a high functioning introvert is writing down what I wanted to say while I'm in the meeting, and then and getting that clarity around it, or before a meeting, like writing it, I think is the core. I think everyone needs to ever get a real comfort with writing. And the other thing that I've done that helped me, work on my storytelling is just get friends and present to your friends. So if you're an actor, you probably do like, script reading and line reading with other people who are in your play or your movie or whatever it might be. You go over these lines again and again and again. If you're a designer, you need to practice the story that you're telling around your ideas. Because honestly, the best idea in the world, if it doesn't have a rich story around it, if you're not able to kind of like work that magic of telling a powerful story, they can fall flat. And so like good ideas have to be accompanied by good stories. And the way you get good at storytelling is through practice, writing and practice.
I love that. And I can completely empathize as a fellow high functioning introvert.
Yeah.
That's great. Folks, I do want to remind you to go ahead and use that Q&A function if you have any questions for Matt along the way, or drop them in the chat. We're watching that too. Matt, I'm curious as also an artist on the side. I'm wondering if you can kind of outline the differences between, a UI, UX designer versus like a graphic designer versus like
Right.
a product designer. Is that something that you could illuminate for the audience?
Totally. And so I would say a graphic designer is sometimes the foundation that many of us have. Many of us, if we go to design school, often graphic design becomes a foundation, and there you're really using color and layout and type and imagery effectively. That's the foundation of design. And I think that designers who have that foundation in graphic design often make better designers all around. There's a bit of a blend between product designer, and so within the digital realm, within the Twitters and Facebooks and Googles, like if you hear product designer being said there, they mean digital product designer. This is something that when I've worked with industrial designers, they take great affront with the fact that we borrowed their term and co-opted it into like the digital world. But user experience designer and user experience designer, user interface designer, and product designer are pretty synonymous. So a product designer within a digital space like a Google or a Facebook or an Adobe, they are people who are designing digital products. Now I'll break down the difference between UX and UI. So UX is looking at the total user experience, and it's probably the most common term used. UI is really zooming in on the user interface, the look and feel of it. But as a user experience designer, you're often doing considering the broader system. So the system, you're considering like how do all the screens fit together? What is the architecture of an app or a product? How do all what will it be like as a user moves from one screen to another? You're doing a lot more mapping and considering the system altogether. And then but there are natural divisions. Some people are much better at visual design and UI design, user interface design than UX. Some people are much better at thinking of all the features and content and functionality and mapping out that complex system. But that's how UX and UI kind of fit together. And both
That's
of
a great
them
explanation.
both of them can fit under product design.
Great. Speaking of that kind of design thinking, Tao, sorry if I mispronounce your name, asks, you mentioned the future of design in general is to be a composer or a director. And I think it all comes down to design thinking. Do you have any recommendations on how to learn design thinking properly?
There's tons of books and tons of courses, and then there's also it's become more of a central practice within many design programs. I would say design thinking sprung out of first industrial design companies, places like IDEO or where I worked at Continuum or Frog. That's where this concept of design thinking first sort of lifted up and started catching on. But I would describe it as basically, once again, collaborative and creative problem solving is at the crux of it. Identifying, what the core need is of the user and then figuring out what's possible and then what are the meaningful and achievable ways to deliver against that need. I would say, like, I think there's definitely whether there's a community college or I mean there's tons of courses online and off. Um, and also lots of great books. I'm sorry I didn't come with a bibliography or like with all the sources into this, but I can definitely follow up on those. Like once this video gets posted, I will share all of my design thinking books into the mix.
Amazing. We got a question from an anonymous attendee here who asks, do you have advice for someone who wants to break into UI UX? What should we include in our portfolios?
So a couple things. If you want to break into UI UX, there are in many places across the country, there's UX boot camps. There's different organizations that can you don't have to go back to school. You could go back to school, but there's once again, I think there's lots of different educational options, but there's also UX boot camps where often people I know have done that career shift and gone through a focused UX boot camp that has taught them the fundamentals and then got them enough experience where they can sometimes get their first job within UI UX. And so there are many different paths and it's totally possible. And I think like it's a combination of creativity, information design, and common sense is really central to UX design. It is not rocket science. You get better and better at it as you go, as you develop more experience and you really start understanding the way that people interact with digital stuff. But it is achievable. And I would say like that quickest path, if you're already in one career, you've already gone to college and you don't really want to go back again, I would be like investigate like UX boot camps. That can be a really good path. And then for myself, as I mentioned, illustration is my love. If I could do that nonstop all day, I totally would. But design has been a really great foundational career path for me. So if some of you are out there thinking like, I really want to get into design, there are pathways. And whether that's a UX boot camp, whether it's going back to programs at community colleges or through, university extension, there's paths into design that can open it up to you.
That's great. And in terms of crafting a digital portfolio for a career in this space, do you
Thank
have it?
you. I do have an
Yeah.
answer for that. Like the most important thing that I look for, and I did some interviews today. Um, of course, storytelling is key. Good design skills are central. Everyone wants to. You have to at the end of the day be able to like craft things that feel compelling, that feel meaningful to the customer you're designing for. But just as important as the final output of a design process is your thinking, your process. Like really great portfolios these days, whether they're online or whether people are walking through them in a meeting, um, share a lot of the process and a lot of the backstory. Here's the challenge we're trying to solve. Here are the unique customer needs that we're designing for. Here's what this person needs, wants, and dreams about. Here's how we think that product can fit those needs. I'm sorry, I'm about to sneeze. And then mapping out the creative process. And usually what that process looks like is really understanding the audience, coming up with a bunch of ideas or concepts, refining those concepts to some really viable opportunities. And then, if possible, even if you're getting into this career, you can take your concepts and evaluate them with other people. And what we do at Adobe or at Twitter or at Facebook, when we come up with concepts, we're taking them into research and we're understanding how people use them. We prototype things. So another thing that there's lots of different tools to prototype concepts. And that can be really powerful if you're creating a portfolio to also show, and look, I created this prototype of how it worked, whether it's a paper prototype or a digital prototype. You do something to suggest what that product would look and feel like. And that becomes really, and then that sort of kind of brings it to life. And then there's like that final output. But being able to see that process of developing that empathy and understanding for the user, coming up with a broad range of concepts, refining those into some meaningful alternatives, and then prototyping it, those are the best portfolios.
Love that. And I love how it's important to explain the design process as well within your portfolio
Yes.
too. Sounds like a lot of that storytelling practice that would be useful there.
And a really meaningful thing these days is people will want to know what was your part? If you worked on something, if you worked on a joint project, what did you do within that joint project? Were you the writer? Were you the designer? Were you the person who took the pictures or created the illustrations? Like that's another thing that we ask quite a bit.
Love that. Um, Maria, looks like they asked in the chat, what's your perspective on emotional design in UX?
And I'll do my best to, I would say like it's absolutely essential that, and kind of a broad question, but like we should like, products that fall flat are purely functional or descriptive products. Like think of any product that you love. The products that you love the most, you definitely have a strong connection to them. You definitely feel like someone was paying attention to your needs and to your wants and how it's supposed to make you feel. Every good product thinks about how it's going to make you feel. Whether it is my favorite drawing app, which is Fresco, whether it is my coffee maker at home, whether like everything that you do, yeah, in a good product, someone has thought about your emotional state, has thought about your needs, what they want you to feel at every stage of the journey. So I would say emotional design is an absolutely central part of UX.
Great. We've got another anonymous question here. They ask, you started your own company, Department 3, but went back working for a company and then found your dream job at Adobe. I'm curious if you miss anything about having your own design company, because I'm torn between the freedom and being self-employed, but also to see that maybe working from a company is the better route. Any suggestions on how to choose or signs to look out for to deciding which path to work on?
I think both are good. I'm really happy that I had my own company. We kept afloat for about 3 years. But what people might have missed on that journey slide that I has is like there were lots of explosive moments. There was like the dot-com boom, the dot-com crash. There was like another housing crash in 2008. There was the COVID and the pandemic. There were all these things that were like these big sweeping changes. I've been glad to work at many different types of companies, to work at agencies and studios, to work at big tech companies. I've learned at every stage. It was really good to have my own business for a while. The one thing about when you have your own business is you have to spend about half the time working on business development, getting the next gig, the next project, the next job, the next client. You have to spend that same amount of time when you're in a big company working on corporate politics and socializing your ideas widely through an organization. But it's it's a little bit more stable. But some people really thrive at freelancers. I will say, I, the one nice thing about working at different types of companies, some big, some small, is learning from other people. So I would say most of my design education happened on the job, working at when I was at Clement Mock Designs and before the term UX had been invented and we called it information architecture. That was really information design. I learned it from several other people who were really good at that. I learned basic HTML programming from other developers there. The nice thing about working with other people is learning from them. You could also, of course, learn from other people if you're collaborating with them on projects. But I would recommend doing both. If you love the freedom of having your own company and it's sustainable for you, by all means, keep doing it. But maybe do a couple stints where you work in bigger companies for a while. I've had 13 jobs, and maybe that's a little too many, but I would say that each one was pretty meaningful to me.
Solid advice. Thank you, Matt. I'm curious to know, Matt, from your perspective, is it important to know or understand coding as a UX UI designer?
It is so what's happening these days is we are all beginning to explore some form of coding, yes. And sometimes, so back in my day, like, gosh, I sound super old. When I started out, you definitely need to understand what is possible from technology. So when I started designing websites at the earliest stage, it was really essential that we understand enough code to be able to design effective websites and be able to create meaningful design outputs that the engineers could just pick up and build. When I first started designing for iPad and Touch UI, it was really essential to know what was possible within the technology there, and to be able to understand graphic user interfaces and how they react to touch, and understand like the infrastructure behind that. What's happening these days is we're all beginning to play with, many designers are beginning to play with AI in different ways. There's different tools that will let you create a meaningful prototype that then you can share with your engineers. So it's no longer the state where designers have to get something totally coded. They can actually do things that begin to build prototypes on their own and then share those with the engineers and be able to go to your engineer and say, like, this is exactly what I mean. This is the type of thing that I'm suggesting. So like, I think what's more important than being able to code is being able to prototype by
Do you
any
have
means
any
necessary.
Do you
Yeah.
have any suggestions? Are there like recommended apps or softwares to know in terms of that would be helpful for prototyping and that
Yeah,
stuff?
I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, the tools that we use beyond the Adobe tools. So we use Adobe tools for quite a bit of the creative process here, but we also use things like Miro, which is a fantastic kind of brainstorming tool. It's not for prototyping, but it's a great way to collaborate with teams. We also use Figma to design many of the digital experiences that we create. And then we have begun to explore products like cursor.ai. So those are some three, yeah. Outside of Adobe's tools, the things that we use quite a bit are Figma, Cursor, and yeah, I saw the autocorrect. I know what you meant, Sir Linda. Yeah, Figma, Miro, and Cursor are the three things that we use outside of the core. And there's like but there's lots of different. I think that's an area of like tools for prototyping websites or apps is definitely this area that is rapidly growing. But I keep going back to this stuff, like, it's as good as what you put into it. I think that's probably the biggest lesson for AI in general, or those tools that is like, you still need to have a good experience that you're creating. I think like you need to own the story. You need to be thinking broadly around the experience that you're striving towards. You need to have that vision developed so that your vision isn't defined by the tools, but you're using the tools to deliver on your vision.
Love that. All right. Well, I believe we've reached the end of our audience questions. Matt, do you have any final advice for our group today?
No, just thank you everyone for joining. And I would say like the final advice is just keep telling stories, keep drawing, keep doing creative stuff all the time, and write down those ideas and practice your stories.
Love that. And if you missed any of that, know that a recording of this will be up on BRIC's YouTube page by the end of this week. Matt, I want to thank you so much for coming on for our speaker series, the first of our 2026 school year. So thank you so much for joining us, for shedding your wisdom, your expertise, and your advice on UX UI design.
Thank you so much, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. All right, everyone. We'll catch you at the next one. Bye, all.